The rain fell in unforgiving sheets, turning the marble plaza in front of Finch Tower into a slick, obsidian mirror that reflected the frantic strobing of camera flashes and the cold, indifferent glare of the city lights. Alistair Finch stood at a podium, a man sculpted from grief and bespoke tailoring, the water plastering his silver-streaked hair to his temples. He was a titan of industry, a man who could move markets with a whisper, yet he had never looked smaller, his voice a raw nerve exposed to the world's ravenous curiosity. "We just want our daughter back," he rasped, his eyes scanning the throng of reporters, a sea of hungry faces and outstretched microphones. "Lily, if you can hear this, we love you. Please, just come home." Beside him, his wife Catherine was a porcelain doll on the verge of shattering, her silent tears lost in the deluge. It was the third day since 10-year-old Lily Finch had vanished from the palatial grounds of their estate, and the hope that had flickered in Alistair's chest was guttering into a cold, heavy dread. The police had no leads. The private investigators he'd hired were grasping at straws, and the world was watching his empire of control crumble. As he turned from the podium, defeated, a small hand tugged at the sleeve of his $1,000 suit. He looked down, irritated. A girl, no older than his own Lily, stood there, drenched and shivering. Her clothes were threadbare, her face smudged with city grime, but her eyes held a startling, unnerving calm. "Mister," she said, her voice clear and steady above the chaos, "don't you worry. Your daughter is safe." Alistair stared, momentarily speechless. The security guard started to move in, but the girl didn't flinch. She just held his gaze, her expression one of absolute certainty. It wasn't a guess. It wasn't a hope. It was a statement of fact, delivered with a wisdom that had no place on a child's face. The guards pulled her away, a tiny piece of flotsam in the storm of media, but her words hung in the air, an impossible anchor in his swirling sea of despair. How could she know? The press conference was a calculated risk, a desperate gambit advised by a crisis management team that charged more per hour than most people earned in a year. They had told him it would humanize him, galvanize public support, and perhaps even shake a crucial tip loose from the city's labyrinthine depths. Instead, Alistair felt as though he had flayed himself open for public consumption, offering up his anguish as a spectacle. The interaction with the strange little girl was the final, surreal act in a theater of the absurd. Back inside the silent, climate-controlled limousine, the scent of wet wool and Catherine's expensive funereal perfume filled the space. She hadn't spoken a word since they left the podium. She simply stared out at the blurred cityscape, her reflection a ghostly twin accompanying them on their somber journey home. Alistair loosened his tie, the knot suddenly feeling like a noose. He replayed the moment in his mind. The girl's eyes. They were a deep, knowing brown, like ancient river stones. There was no fear in them, no hint of childish fantasy. He had looked into the eyes of heads of state, of corporate raiders, of men who held the fates of nations in their hands, and he had never seen such profound conviction. "Did you see that girl?" he asked, his voice low. Catherine didn't turn. "I saw 100 vultures, Alistair. Which one are you referring to?" Her tone was brittle, each word a shard of glass. "The one who spoke to me. A child. She said Lily was safe." A humorless little laugh escaped Catherine's lips. "Oh, wonderful. A street urchin psychic. Perhaps we should fire the police and hire her instead." "Did you get her name? Maybe she has a crystal ball we can consult." The sarcasm was a shield, he knew, a defense against a pain so vast it threatened to swallow her whole. But it still stung. She wasn't joking, Cat. There was something odd. "Everything is odd, Alistair. Our daughter is gone, vanished into thin air from a property with more security than Fort Knox." A little girl in rags telling you a fairy tale is the least odd thing that has happened this week. She finally turned to face him, her blue eyes, usually so vibrant, now clouded with a storm of accusations. "Where were you, Alistair?" "When it happened. Do you even remember?" He did. He remembered it with a clarity that felt like a physical wound. He was in a boardroom, 12 hours and 3 time zones away, closing a hostile takeover. He had celebrated with champagne while his daughter was disappearing from her own backyard. The call had come in the middle of their victory toast, a shrill, unwelcome intrusion from a world he had long kept at arm's length. The world of family, of scraped knees and bedtime stories, and a little girl who loved horses more than anything. "I was working," he said, the words tasting like ash. "Of course you were," she whispered, turning back to the window. "You're always working." The rest of the drive passed in a silence thicker than the fog rolling in from the harbor. Their home, a sprawling neo-Georgian mansion that sat on 50 acres of manicured land, loomed out of the mist like a mausoleum. Usually its grandeur was a source of pride, a testament to his success. Tonight, it felt like a prison. Every empty room, every silent hallway screamed Lily's absence. The head of his security detail, a former Secret Service agent named Marcus Thorne, met them at the door. His face was a grim, impassive mask. "Anything?" Alistair asked, though he already knew the answer. "Nothing, sir. We've reviewed the surveillance footage for the 100th time. There's a blind spot near the old oak tree by the stables. She was playing there. 1 minute she's on the swing, the next, she's not. No unauthorized vehicles entered or exited the property. No breaches in the perimeter fence. It's as if she just evaporated." Evaporated. The word was too clean, too clinical. It didn't account for the terror, the cold, creeping horror that had taken up permanent residence in Alistair's gut. He walked through the cavernous foyer, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. He passed the grand staircase where Lily used to slide down the banister, her laughter bouncing off the walls. He passed the living room, where a half-finished puzzle of a mythical castle lay on a table. He went to his study, a room paneled in dark mahogany and lined with books he never read. It was his sanctuary, his command center. He poured himself a generous measure of scotch, the amber liquid doing little to warm the ice in his veins. His gaze fell on a framed photograph on his desk. It was of him and Lily, taken last summer in the Hamptons. He was in a crisp linen shirt, smiling for the camera, while Lily, all of 9 years old, looked off to the side, a wistful, distant expression on her face. He had always thought of her as a miniature version of Catherine. Beautiful, graceful, destined for a life of privilege. But now, looking at the photo, he saw something else. A loneliness. A quiet melancholy he had been too busy to notice. The crisis management team had prepped a dossier on public perception. The narrative was predictable. The grieving billionaire father, a modern-day King Midas whose golden touch couldn't protect his own child. They had coached him on what to say, how to angle his body towards the cameras, how to modulate his voice to convey the perfect blend of strength and vulnerability. He had played his part, but it felt like a grotesque parody. The only genuine moment in the entire sordid affair had been the encounter with the little girl. "Your daughter is safe." He picked up the phone and dialed Marcus. "Thorne, that girl at the press conference, the one who got through security. I want you to find her." There was a pause on the other end. "Sir, the street kid? May I ask why?" "She said she knows Lily is safe. It's a long shot, a ridiculous one, but it's more than we have. Find her. I don't care what it takes. Find her." He hung up before Marcus could argue. It was irrational, a desperate man chasing ghosts, but in a world that had suddenly stopped making sense, The unwavering certainty in a child's eyes was the only thing he had to hold on to. He drained his glass, the scotch burning a path down his throat. For 3 days he had been operating on adrenaline and instinct, a machine directing a vast, intricate search. Now, alone in the silence of his study, the machine sputtered and died, leaving just a man. A father. And the terrifying, all-consuming question that had been lurking in the shadows of his mind finally stepped into the light. Who was his daughter, really? And what if she hadn't been taken? What if she had simply run away? The part of the city where Maya lived didn't have a name on any of the glossy tourist maps. It was a tangle of narrow streets, wedged between a rail yard and a defunct chemical plant. A neighborhood of sagging brick tenements and bodegas with faded awnings. It was a place the city had forgotten, or perhaps had chosen to ignore. Their apartment was on the 4th floor of a walk-up, a small 2-room space that always smelled faintly of cilantro and her mother's cleaning supplies. From their one window, Maya could see the gleaming spires of downtown, a forest of glass and steel where men like Alastair Finch lived. It looked like another world. Her mother, Ilara, was waiting for her when she got home, her hands on her hips, her brow furrowed with a worry that had etched fine lines around her eyes. "Maya, where have you been? I was worried sick, and you're soaked to the bone." Ilara knelt and began to peel off Maya's wet, flimsy jacket. Her hands, though chapped and calloused from years of scrubbing other people's floors, were gentle. "I went to see the rich man," Maya said simply, as if announcing she'd gone to the park. Ilara stopped, her hands hovering in the air. "What rich man? Maya, what are you talking about?" "The one on the TV. The one whose daughter is missing." "I went to the big shiny building. I saw him." Ilara's face paled. She grabbed Maya by the shoulders, her grip a little too tight. "You went all the way downtown by yourself? Maya, you can't do that. It's not safe. Do you have any idea what could have happened to you?" "But I had to," Maya insisted, her voice unwavering. "They all look so sad. And they're wrong. The girl isn't lost. She's safe." Ilara sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of the entire world. She pulled her daughter into a fierce hug, burying her face in Maya's damp hair. "Oh, mi corazon, you have too soft a heart. You can't fix all the world's sadness." She guided Maya to the small, worn-out armchair in the corner and wrapped her in a thick, dry blanket. She bustled around the tiny kitchen, making chamomile tea, her movements quick and efficient. "It's just a feeling you have, sweet girl. A wish. You want the little girl to be safe, so you believe she is." "It's not a wish," Maya said to the room. "I know." Ilara placed a steaming mug in her hands. "How, Maya? How can you possibly know that?" Maya looked down at her lap. She knew she couldn't explain it in a way her mother would understand. It wasn't a voice in her head or a dream. It was a quiet, solid thing inside her chest. A piece of truth that had been there for as long as she could remember. It was connected to the stories her mother used to tell her. Fairy tales of a girl in a castle who wasn't a real princess, who dreamed of running away to live in a cottage in the woods. It was connected to the one precious thing she owned. A small, silver locket her mother had given her on her 5th birthday. She pulled it out from under her shirt now. It was tarnished with age, its surface etched with a delicate floral pattern. She clicked it open. On one side was a tiny, faded picture of her mother, looking impossibly young. The other side was empty, a space waiting to be filled. But it wasn't a locket for pictures. She twisted the base and a faint, tinkling melody began to play. A lullaby so sweet and sad, it made her heart ache. "It's the music," she whispered. "The music knows." Ilara watched her, her expression a mixture of love and a deep, hidden sorrow. She knew the locket was at the heart of Maya's fantasy. She had given it to her after all. It was the last remnant of a life she had tried to bury. A life before Maya, before this apartment, before the endless cycle of work and worry. A life where she had dared to love a boy from a different world, a boy with eyes the color of the sky, and a future that had no room for a girl like her. "It's a beautiful song," she said softly, stroking Maya's hair. "But it's just a song, Maya. It can't find a missing girl." Later that night, as Maya lay in her small bed, listening to the rumble of the late-night train and the distant wail of a siren, she held the locket tight in her hand. She closed her eyes and thought about the girl on TV, the one they called Lily Finch. She had a pretty face, but her eyes were like the windows of an empty house. She wasn't the girl from the stories. She wasn't the girl the music belonged to. The music belonged to another girl. A girl who was hiding, not lost. A girl who was waiting. And somehow Maya knew that the sad, rich man would come looking for her. He had to. He was the only other person who could hear the music. Marcus Thorne was ruthlessly efficient. He had been trained to find needles in haystacks, and finding one little girl in a city of 8 million was a matter of process. He cross-referenced the time of the press conference with surveillance cameras from every shop, traffic light, and ATM within a 10-block radius of Finch Tower. It took his team less than 24 hours to trace her. They followed her digital ghost as she navigated the subway system with an unnerving confidence, a solitary child moving through the city's arteries like a blood cell, until her trail vanished into the digital desert of her neighborhood, a place where the city's all-seeing eye had cataracts. From there, it was old-fashioned legwork. A 10-year-old girl with a memorable face was not hard to track in a community where everyone knew everyone else's business. By noon the next day, Thorne had an address. He advised against Alastair going himself. "Sir, let me handle this. We don't know the situation. The girl, her family, they might try to extort you." "I'm not sending a proxy, Thorne," Alastair said, his voice hard. "This isn't a business negotiation. Get the car. I'm going myself." The journey from his world to hers was a descent through the city's social strata. The gleaming skyscrapers gave way to industrial warehouses, then to rows of identical suburban houses, and finally, to the crumbling brick and graffiti-scarred streets of Maya's neighborhood. The Bentley, with its silent engine and tinted windows, looked like a spaceship that had landed on a foreign planet. People stopped and stared, their faces a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Alastair felt a discomfort that had nothing to do with the poverty around him, and everything to do with his own alien presence. He was an invader here. He found the building, a grim tenement that looked as though it were being held up by sheer force of will. The air in the stairwell was thick with the smells of boiled cabbage and damp concrete. He knocked on the door of apartment 4B, his knuckles rapping against peeling paint. The door opened a crack, held by a chain, and a woman's tired eyes peered out at him. He recognized her instantly, though she was older now, the youthful softness of her face replaced by a resilient hardness. It was Alara, the girl from the stables, the girl he had loved one long, impossible summer 20 years ago, before his father had intervened, before a check had been written and a heart had been broken. The shock was a physical blow. He stumbled back a step, his carefully constructed composure dissolving. He had wondered, in idle moments over the years, what had become of her. He had never imagined this. Her eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed with a fierce, protective anger. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You have no right." "Alara," he breathed, the name feeling foreign on his tongue after so long. I didn't know." From behind her, a small voice piped up. "Mama, who is it?" The door opened wider, and there stood the girl from the press conference, his daughter. He knew it with a certainty that defied logic, a primal recognition that resonated in his very bones. She had his eyes, the same intense, slate-gray gaze that stared back at him from the mirror every morning. She was looking at him not with fear or surprise, but with a quiet expectation, as if she had been waiting for him all her life. "I told you he would come," she said to her mother. Ilara shot him a look of pure hatred, a look that conveyed 2 decades of pain and betrayal. "Get out, Alistair. You are not welcome here. We have nothing for you." She tried to close the door, but he put his hand against it, his strength easily overpowering hers. "Please," he said, his voice cracking. "My daughter. Lily. She's missing. Your little girl. She told me she was safe." "How? How did she know?" Maya stepped forward, out from behind her mother's protective stance. She held his gaze, her small face serious. "Because the girl you're looking for isn't Lily," she said. "Not the real one." Alistair's mind reeled. The world tilted on its axis. He looked from the fierce, defiant woman who had once held his heart to the small, solemn child who had his eyes, and a terrifying, impossible truth began to dawn. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice a hoarse whisper. Ilara pulled Maya behind her again, shielding her from his gaze. "You heard the girl. Now go. You're upsetting my daughter." "Our daughter," Alistair said, the words clawing their way out of his throat. He looked at Maya, truly looked at her, and saw not just his eyes, but the determined set of his jaw, the shape of his hands. "She's ours, isn't she, Ilara? She's my daughter." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of a passing train. Ilara's face crumpled, the anger giving way to a profound, bone-deep weariness. The fight went out of her, leaving behind only the raw, aching truth. She didn't have to answer. He could see it in her eyes. All these years he had been living a lie. He had a daughter, a real daughter, growing up in a world he couldn't have imagined while he was raising a stranger. The girl in the photograph on his desk, the girl whose absence was tearing his world apart, was not his child. And this little girl, this fierce, knowing child standing in a crumbling tenement, was. "Your daughter is safe," she had said. Now he understood. She wasn't talking about the girl the world knew as Lily Finch. She was talking about herself. The small apartment felt like a confession box, thick with the weight of unspoken history. Alistair sat awkwardly on a lumpy sofa that had seen better decades, the springs groaning in protest. He felt like a giant in a dollhouse, his expensive suit and polished shoes a grotesque absurdity in this humble space. Ilara stood by the window, her arms crossed, her back to him, a sentry guarding the ramparts of her life. Maya sat on the floor, watching him with those unsettlingly familiar eyes. She had placed a small, tarnished silver locket on the coffee table between them. "Tell me," Alistair said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual authority. "Tell me everything." Ilara turned, her face a mask of exhausted resignation. "What is there to tell? You know the story. A rich boy and a stable girl. A summer romance that was never meant to last. Your father made that very clear." He remembered the confrontation with his father, a man for whom family was a dynasty and love was a transaction. He had been given an ultimatum. End it with Ilara, or be cut off, disowned, cast out of the kingdom he was raised to inherit. He was 20 years old, arrogant and ambitious, and he had made his choice. "He paid you off," Alistair said, the memory tasting like shame. "He gave you money to disappear." "He gave me a check and told me if I ever contacted you again, he would ruin me." She corrected him, her voice devoid of emotion. "I tore it up in his face. I didn't want your family's dirty money. I just wanted to be left alone. I was already gone by the time I realized. I was pregnant." Alistair closed his eyes. The pain of it was a physical thing, a fist clenching in his chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Elara, I would have." "You would have what?" She cut him off, a spark of the old fire returning to her eyes. "Married me? Brought me into your world of cold marble and colder hearts. Let your father raise our child to be like him. To be like you? I did what I had to do to protect her. I gave her a life, a simple one. Yes, but a life filled with love, not ambition. A life where she would be cherished for who she is, not for her name." He had no answer to that. He looked around the small, clean apartment. It was poor, but it wasn't miserable. There were drawings taped to the walls, a stack of worn library books on a shelf, a sense of warmth and life that was painfully absent from his own cavernous mansion. "And Lily?" he asked. "The girl we raised. Who is she?" This was Maya's turn to speak. "Her name isn't Lily," she said. "It's Sarah, and she's not lost. She's visiting her real family." Alistair stared at her. "How do you know that?" Maya picked up the locket and twisted the base. The faint, tinkling melody filled the room. Alistair felt a jolt of recognition, a ghost of a memory. It was the song from a music box he had given Elara that summer, a cheap trinket he'd won at a carnival. "The music," he whispered. "You knew because of the music?" "The music belongs to your daughter," Maya said with a child's simple logic. "I'm your daughter, so the music belongs to me." The other girl, Sarah, she had a box that played the same song, but it made her sad. It didn't belong to her. She told me so. The pieces began to fall into place, forming a picture so bizarre it was almost unbelievable. "She told you? You know her? You've spoken to her?" Maya nodded. "She comes to the park near the library sometimes. She likes to watch the kids play. She says it's because they look happy. We started talking. She told me she felt like a ghost in her own house, like she was wearing a costume that didn't fit. She said she found a letter from a hospital hidden in her mother's things about a baby exchange." The room spun. A hospital. A baby exchange. It couldn't be real. It was the plot of a soap opera. And yet, it explained everything. The gnawing feeling he'd always had that something was slightly off. Lily's, Sarah's, melancholy, her sense of detachment, the feeling that she was performing the role of Lily Finch rather than living it. She ran away, Alistair realized aloud. She wasn't kidnapped. She went to find them, her real parents. She wanted to know where she belonged, Maya said. Alistair felt the foundations of his life cracking beneath him. His entire existence, the dynasty he was building, the legacy he was meant to secure, was all based on a lie. A lie so profound it had shaped two families, two girls, two destinies. He looked at Elara, at the years of hardship and sacrifice etched on her face. "You knew," he said, "all this time. You knew I was raising the wrong child." "I saw her picture in a magazine years ago," Elara admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "The Finch family at some charity ball. I saw the girl you called Lily, and I knew she wasn't mine. Which meant, mine was with you. I prayed you would be a good father. I prayed you would love her." "But you didn't come forward," he said, a note of accusation in his voice. "You let me live a lie." "And what would have happened if I had?" she retorted, her voice rising. "You think your family would have just welcomed us with open arms? They would have destroyed us. They would have taken Maya, and I would have been left with nothing. I made a choice, Alistair. I chose my daughter's happiness over some abstract notion of truth. I chose to keep her safe. Here, with me." He couldn't argue with her logic. He knew his family. He knew the lengths his mother, in particular, would go to in order to protect the Finch name. The scandal would have been catastrophic. A baby swap? It was unthinkable. His mother, the formidable matriarch Beatrice Finch, would have buried the truth, and Ilara along with it. The full weight of his loss and his discovery settled upon him. He had lost one daughter to a lie, and in the process, he had missed the entire life of another. He had been so focused on building an empire for a child who wasn't his that he had failed to even know the one who was. He looked at Maya, this incredible, resilient, intelligent girl who had navigated a world of poverty and neglect to find the truth, to orchestrate this impossible revelation. "What do I do now?" he asked, the question directed not at Ilara, but at the 10-year-old child who seemed to hold all the answers. Maya looked at him, her expression serious. "You have to tell the truth," she said, "and you have to go find Sarah. She's scared. She needs her father, too, even if you're not the one she was born with." Her wisdom was a gut punch. In her simple, direct way, she had laid out the only path forward. It wasn't about bloodlines or inheritance. It was about fatherhood, a role he had played poorly for one child and had abdicated completely for another. "Thorne," he said into his phone a few minutes later, standing in the dingy hallway outside the apartment. "Stop the search for Lily. I have a new assignment for you. I need you to find a girl named Sarah. And I need you to find out everything you can about a baby exchange at St. Jude's Hospital 10 years ago." He hung up and leaned against the wall, the smell of cabbage and decay filling his lungs. It smelled like the truth. It smelled like the beginning of the end of his world and the start of something new, something terrifying and unknown. He went back inside. Ilara was making tea. Maya was drawing at the small kitchen table. It was a simple, domestic scene, a world away from his own. He wanted to be a part of it more than he had ever wanted a corporate takeover or a new skyscraper. "I have to see my mother," he said. Beatrice Finch lived in the family's ancestral home on the Upper East Side, a limestone fortress filled with antiques and ghosts. She was a woman who had weaponized her social standing, a queen ruling over a kingdom of old money and older secrets. She received Alistair in the morning room, a sun-drenched space that did little to warm her icy demeanor. She was impeccably dressed, her white hair coiffed into a perfect helmet, her back ramrod straight. "Alistair," she said, her voice as crisp as a starched collar. "You look dreadful. This whole ordeal is taking its toll. Any news?" He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He stood before her, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Lily wasn't kidnapped," he said. Her perfectly arched eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "What are you talking about? Has she been found? She ran away. And her name isn't Lily. It's Sarah." He watched her face carefully. For a split second, a flicker of something. Fear, panic, crossed her features before being instantly suppressed, replaced by a mask of cool incomprehension. "I don't understand. Has the strain been too much for you, dear?" "I was at St. Jude's Hospital 10 years ago," he said, the words falling like stones into the quiet room. "After the accident." The accident. That's what they had called it. A nurse, overworked and exhausted, had accidentally switched two newborns in the nursery. One, the daughter of a powerful billionaire. The other, the daughter of a struggling single mother. The hospital administration, terrified of the legal and reputational fallout, had discovered the error within hours. A frantic secret meeting had been called. A deal had been struck. The hospital administrator confessed everything. Alistair lied, watching her reaction. "He kept records. It's all there in writing. How you paid them for their silence. How you paid the other family a pittance to take our child and raise her as their own, while we raised theirs." He was guessing, extrapolating from the pieces Maya and Ilara had given him. But as he saw the color drain from his mother's face, he knew he had hit the truth. "That's a preposterous accusation," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "A desperate fantasy." "Is it?" he pressed, stepping closer. Then tell me about Ilara, the girl from the stables, the girl you paid to go away. Did you know she was pregnant with my child? Your grandchild? Beatrice finally broke. She sank into a velvet armchair, her composure shattering like a dropped vase. You were a boy, she whispered, her gaze fixed on a point in the distant past. You had a future, a legacy to uphold. She was a distraction, an irrelevance, and then the unthinkable happened. She recounted the story in a low, detached monotone, as if discussing a business deal gone wrong. After the hospital's terrible mistake, she had seen an opportunity, a solution. The child they were given, Sarah, was healthy and strong. The other child, Alistair's biological daughter with the stable girl, was a complication, a scandal waiting to happen. It was a clean slate, Beatrice said, a chilling pragmatism in her voice. We could raise the girl we were given as a Finch. No one would ever know. The bloodline would be diluted, but the name, the legacy, would remain intact. Your legacy. I did it for you, Alistair, to protect you. Protect me? He exploded, his voice raw with a fury that had been building for years. You stole my daughter. You gave my child away and lied to me for her entire life. You let me build a life, a future, for a stranger, while my own flesh and blood grew up in poverty. You call that protection? I call it pragmatism, she snapped back, her eyes flashing with the old steel. I made a difficult choice to prevent a greater catastrophe. That girl, Maya, is better off where she is. Bringing her into this world now would only cause chaos and pain. The chaos is already here, he roared, and the pain is something I'm just beginning to understand. He looked at the woman who had raised him, a woman who valued lineage above love, appearances above truth, and he felt nothing but a profound, hollow pity. She had built her life on a foundation of lies, and now the walls were caving in. He walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her secrets and her antiques, a queen on a crumbling throne. He knew he could expose her, ruin her, but what would be the point? The damage was done. His only path forward was not to assign blame, but to mend what had been broken. His phone rang. It was Thorne. We found her, sir. Sarah. She's with a family in Queens, a carpenter and his wife. The family whose baby was in the nursery next to yours. Thorne's voice was hesitant. Sir, they were paid a substantial sum of money 10 years ago by a holding company linked to your mother. They were told there had been a complication and their biological child had died. The money was, a settlement. They were offered the chance to adopt another baby, an orphan. They accepted. They raised her as their own. They named her Sarah. Alistair leaned his head against the cold glass of the town car's window, the city lights a meaningless blur. It was worse than he imagined. His mother hadn't just swapped the babies. She had told a grieving family their child was dead, paid for their silence, and then given them his own daughter to raise, passing her off as an orphan. A clean slate, she had called it. It was a masterpiece of cruelty. And the other family? Alistair asked, his voice thick with dread. Sarah's biological parents? They're the ones who took the payout from the hospital, sir, Thorne said quietly. They effectively sold their child. They left the state a week later and haven't been heard from since. So Sarah, the girl he knew as Lily, was truly an island. The parents who had raised her were not hers, and the parents who had conceived her had abandoned her. The only family she had ever known was a lie. Get me the address, Alistair said. I'm going to see my daughter. He paused. Both of them. The house in Queens was a modest, 2-story clapboard, with a neatly tended garden in the front and a porch swing that creaked in the autumn breeze. It was the picture of humble, suburban tranquility. Alistair felt more nervous walking up the cracked concrete path than he had before any boardroom showdown. He had brought Maya with him. It was her idea. "She needs a friend," she had said, "not another scary grown-up." Alara had been reluctant, but had eventually agreed, waiting in the car down the street, a silent, anxious guardian. A kind-faced woman with flour on her apron opened the door. Her eyes widened when she saw Alistair Finch on her doorstep, a man she had only seen on the news. "Mr. Finch? What are you doing here?" Before he could answer, a girl appeared behind the woman. It was Lily. No, Sarah. She looked smaller here, without the designer clothes and the cavernous mansion to dwarf her. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater. When she saw Maya, her face broke into a relieved smile. "You came," she said. Maya ran to her and gave her a hug. It was a gesture so natural, so pure, that it brought a lump to Alistair's throat. The woman, who introduced herself as Martha, looked on in confusion. "You two know each other?" "We're friends," Maya said simply. Alistair looked at Sarah, at the daughter he had raised. He had spent 10 years living under the same roof with her, and yet he felt he was seeing her for the first time. The quiet melancholy was still there, but it was overlaid with a new emotion, a fragile, tentative peace. "Can we talk?" Alistair asked, his voice gentle. They sat in a small, cozy living room, filled with framed photos and handmade quilts. Sarah's adoptive father, a large man with gentle eyes and calloused hands named Frank, came in from his workshop, wiping sawdust on his trousers. The story came out in a torrent of pain and confusion. Sarah, feeling like an imposter in her own life, had found the hospital letter hidden in a jewelry box. The truth had unraveled, and she had sought out the only name she had. Frank and Martha, the parents listed on her real birth certificate, the one that had been suppressed and hidden away. "I just wanted to see," she said, her voice trembling. "I wanted to know what a real family felt like." Martha put a protective arm around her. "We didn't know," she said to Alistair, her eyes full of tears. "They told us our baby, our little Lily, had died. They gave us all that money. We thought it was blood money. We didn't want it, but they insisted. Then they told us about another baby, an orphan girl who needed a home. We never imagined." Alistair looked at this family, at the genuine love and warmth that filled the small room, and his heart ached for what Sarah had lost and for what she had found. He had given her a life of unimaginable privilege, but Frank and Martha had given her a home. "I'm not here to take you away," Alistair said to Sarah, the words feeling inadequate, clumsy. "I know I haven't. I haven't been the father you deserved. I was distracted, absent, and I am so sorry for that. Whatever you decide, wherever you feel you belong, I will support you. Always." Sarah looked at him, and for the first time he saw not the distant politeness of Lily Finch, but the raw vulnerability of a lost little girl. "You're all I've ever known," she whispered. "But this feels real." Maya, who had been sitting quietly beside her, took her hand. "You can have both," she said with her simple, profound wisdom. "You don't have to choose." And in that moment, Alistair understood. It wasn't about choosing. It was about expanding. It was about creating a new kind of family, one born not of blood or obligation, but of a shared, complicated history, and a desire to heal. He spent the rest of the afternoon there, in that small house in Queens. He talked with Frank about woodworking. He watched Maya and Sarah draw pictures together at the kitchen table. He saw Catherine, his wife, pull up in a taxi, her face pale and drawn. She had found the address on his desk. She stood at the doorway, watching the scene, her carefully constructed world in ruins. She looked at Sarah, the girl she had raised and loved as her own, And then she looked at Alistair, and a silent understanding passed between them. The lies were over. Whatever came next, they would face it together. When it was time to leave, Alistair knelt in front of Maya. He was still a stranger to her, a ghost from her mother's past. He hadn't earned the right to be her father yet. "I know I have a lot to make up for," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't give you back the years we lost. But I can promise you this. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be the father you deserve." Maya looked at him, her gray eyes serious. Then she did something that shattered the remaining armor around his heart. She reached out and placed her small hand on his cheek. "I know," she said. The months that followed were a delicate, complicated dance of rebuilding. The story of the Finch baby swap never broke to the press. Alistair used his considerable power not to bury the truth, but to protect the people it would hurt. He arranged a quiet, private settlement with the hospital, ensuring that no other family would ever have to endure what they had. He didn't expose his mother. He simply cut her out of his life, leaving her to her gilded prison of lies. His relationship with Catherine surprisingly began to heal. Stripped of the pretense and the social obligations that had defined their marriage, they found each other again in their shared grief and their shared responsibility. They went into therapy. They learned to talk to each other, not as business partners in the enterprise of being the Finches, but as two wounded people trying to find their way back to one another. Sarah chose to stay with Frank and Martha, but she didn't cut ties with Alistair and Catherine. She spent weekends at the mansion, no longer a ghost in its hallways, but a welcome guest. She and Maya formed an unbreakable bond, two sisters forged in the strangest of circumstances. They were a study in contrasts, Sarah, quiet and artistic, Maya, outspoken and fiercely intelligent. But they understood each other in a way no one else could. Alistair's life transformed. He delegated the day-to-day running of his empire, discovering that the world didn't stop spinning if he wasn't in a boardroom. He started spending his time and his money differently. He set up a foundation in Ilara's name, funding community centers, scholarships, and legal aid services in the forgotten neighborhoods of the city. He didn't just write checks. He was present, listening to community leaders, learning about the struggles of the people his world had been built on ignoring. He and Ilara never rekindled their romance. The past held too much pain for that. But they built something new, a partnership, a friendship based on their shared love for Maya. He bought the tenement building she lived in, not to evict the residents, but to renovate it, bringing it up to code, ensuring that every family had a safe, dignified place to live. He did not ask Ilara and Maya to move into his mansion. Instead, he found himself spending more and more time in their small, vibrant apartment, helping Maya with her homework, listening to Ilara's stories, feeling more at home than he ever had in his own palace. He was learning how to be a father. It didn't come naturally. He was often clumsy, saying the wrong thing, trying too hard. But he was persistent. He learned that fatherhood wasn't about providing. It was about being present. It was about showing up for the school play, even if you had to cancel a meeting in Tokyo. It was about learning the names of your daughter's friends. It was about knowing how to make her favorite tea. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year after his world had fallen apart and been rebuilt, Alistair found himself in a public park. He was sitting on a checkered blanket with a sprawling, chaotic, beautiful group of people. There was Catherine laughing with Martha. There was Frank showing Maya how to carve a piece of wood. There was Sarah sketching in her notebook, a genuine smile on her face. And there was Ilara, watching over them all with a quiet, contented strength. Maya ran over to him, her face bright with excitement, and handed him a small, hand-carved bird. "Frank made it for me," she said, "but he said I should give it to you." Alistair took the small, smooth object. It was simple, unadorned, but it felt more valuable than anything in his art collection. "It's beautiful," he said. "Thank you." Maya leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Are you happy?" she asked. He looked at the scene before him, this impossible, wonderful family brought together by lies and secrets, now bound by truth and love. He thought of the man he had been a year ago, a king in an empty castle, and the man he was today, the richest man in the world, having a picnic on the grass. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he was no longer afraid to feel. "I am." He finally understood. His daughter was safe. They both were. And in finding them, he had finally, after all these years, found himself.